Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. We are going to be talking about saving wild rivers, especially about the Stanislaus River Archive, with my guest, Larry Orman. He is the volunteer manager for the Stanislaus River Archive, but he has formerly been the executive director with the Greenbelt Alliance and was executive director and senior fellow with the Green Info Network, as well as board chair of the organization Friends of the River. And going back to the 1970s, he was a whitewater rafting guide with ARTA, the American River Touring Association. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. Good to be here.
You and I both love wild rivers. You have guided them. I have just enjoyed going on them, rafting on them. The first one I did was on the Stanislaus back in the 1970s when we were trying to stop the New Melones Dam from being built on this gorgeous wild river in California. Can you tell us where it is and why it is so special?
The Stanislaus is in the middle of California. It's in the Sierra foothills. It's a little bit north of Yosemite, and it's east of Modesto and Manteca. It sits in gold country, right along the area where Columbia and Angels Camp are. It's just right in the sweet spot of the Central Sierra. The river that most people ran flowed about 17 miles. Above that was not runnable, and below that was flat water. And that river was just a gem of a place. It's a great location and a phenomenal, unique canyon. One of the things that made the Stanislaus River so unique is that it's a limestone canyon, and there just aren't very many of those in the Central Sierra. The limestone creates incredible, steep, soaring cliffs. It creates a set of caves that are just remarkable with beautiful formations inside. But the other thing about the river that was amazing is that it was accessible to everybody. It was an easy river to be on. Almost any kind of person could be on, and eventually even disabled people made it their central river experience place. But it was a wonderful place. It didn't have rapids that were too challenging, but they were fun. It had gorgeous side canyons and beautiful beaches, and lots of them, so that at one point there were almost 100,000 people a year going down the river before it was flooded by the New Melones Dam.
And the dam wasn't really necessary. They claimed it was going to help provide water for agriculture in the Central Valley, but that really wasn't necessary.
Yeah, the tragedy of the Stanislaus River is that New Melones Dam was designed to be way bigger than the watershed that it was ostensibly designed to help manage would have justified, and that meant that it was going to push up and flood over the river. Clearly, there are lots of different opinions on this, but among the conservationists who were fighting this battle, and that included a lot of experts on water, the dam could have well been better for flood control had it been a lower reservoir dam. And in fact, with such a wide reservoir, huge amounts of water evaporate, so that the actual amount of water it can deliver is really much lower than it otherwise should have been.
Can we ever remove a dam like that and get a wild river back?
Removing the dam is probably not a feasible thing, but in 2022, a group was created called Restoring the Stanislaus, restoringthestanislaus.org, and its mission is to see whether there's ways to reoperate New Melones so that two things could happen. One, the river that was available to everybody could be exposed again instead of being flooded. And secondly, the water that might be helpful for agriculture and other in-stream purposes could be provided in different ways. And the main way of that is to get farmers downstream to embed the water in groundwater basins and then not have the evaporation problem that happens and have it be available to be pumped out. There's actually a pretty feasible way to do all this and it just has to do with convincing people that the economics of what they've got are not right and that this is a better way. So it's not removing the dam, it's reoperating it at a much lower reservoir size.
Your organizations also are concerned about the land conservation, and I think it's important that we recognize that it's not just the water, the river, but along the canyons that form the rivers, along the land. Who owns the land, and what is being done to protect and preserve the green belts along the river?
Well, interestingly enough, the lower Stanislaus, which is the area from Oakdale on down, basically, has a little bit of whitewater, and there's actually quite a bit of effort to try to protect the riparian habitat down there and to provide some way for salmon at least to get up toward where the dam is, obviously not above the dam. And that's a big thing. Within what we would call the Stanislaus River, which is the old river that was flooded, most of that's owned by the Bureau of Land Management, so it's public land. The land that's owned by the public along where the reservoir is now is public land, but of course when the reservoir is filled, it's floodwater areas, and when the reservoir is low, the landscape is very devastated because of all the flooding that's happened.
When I did my first river raft trip on the Stanislaus, I was thrilled with the rapids, but I also learned that the quiet parts of the river were wonderful. You could actually jump in with your life jacket on and float in the river without the raft. I found that many rivers I did since then, from the Kern to the Klamath to the Snake, it was not just the rapids. Even the Colorado and the Grand Canyon, you have the beautiful river quiet parts as well as the rapids. Since you guided so many hundreds of people, did you find that they also made that beautiful discovery that the river is more than just doing the rapids?
In a day and a half, the Stanislaus River changed people. I guided hundreds of trips on it. In each of those trips, people go through a discovery. They arrive above the canyon, they go down, they get on the boats, they go through rapids, they find this phenomenal side creek, Rose Creek, that's in there where they can go up and wander through pools and waterfalls. And as you say, you can jump in some of the rapids and swim them. There's open sections. The camps are beautiful. It was a river that really wanted to let you just experience nature and not be overwhelmed by whitewater challenge or difficulty. It was so rare. There just are hardly any other rivers in California where you can have that kind of gentle experience that's also exciting.
You're preserving this incredible history of the river in an archives. You're encouraging people to send whatever pictures and information they have about their experiences on the river for the archive. What is in the Stanislaus River Archive?
StanislausRiver.org is the website, and right now there's about 3,000 items, which include documents, videos, pictures, all sorts of things. We're in the middle of a fairly major revision of the website, which we've always wanted to do, where we will switch it around a little bit. So instead of just being an archive, which it's very good at being right now, it'll also be a place where we can have a lot of available stories of things that happened on the river and in the fights to protect the river. That change should happen in the next couple of months, and it'll bring some really new features to the website. But basically, it's a place to remember this amazing place and the incredible campaigns that were fought to save it. It's easy to remember, to think that environmental campaigns just happen and all the laws that are there now, but in the 1970s, when this battle for the Stanislaus was happening, Earth Day had occurred just a couple years before. There was hardly any environmental protection. There was no history of grassroots action. The Stanislaus campaign involved tens of thousands of people, and it was the primary vehicle for learning how to do these kind of massive grassroots campaigns to save places. We didn't succeed on the Stanislaus. The river was flooded in the early 80s, but it's the last major river that was lost to a dam, and it was a watershed moment that taught so many people how to do this better. In fact, the Tuolumne River just to the south was saved literally a couple of years after the Stanislaus was flooded, largely out of lessons that were learned in fighting for the Stanislaus. So it not only was an amazing place, it was an incredible set of campaigns that went on for a decade, trying all sorts of ways, legal, political, just tons of different ways of trying to work to save a place.
I recall when I was running the Ecology Center of Southern California in the 1970s, and we tried to get a ballot initiative on the ballot to stop the dam that many volunteer activists slept overnight in the Ecology Center as we tried to get the signatures. The sad part about the initiative was that if you wanted to say no to the dam, you had to vote yes on the initiative, and that was very confusing to people.
Yeah, that was Proposition 17 in 1974. It was an initiative measure, so the Friends of the River was formed out of the development of that initiative. Once it was written, thousands and thousands of people helped qualify it by gathering signatures, and then they campaigned for it. As you say, the biggest problem was it was a confusingly worded thing, and the opposition seized on that. So in November 1974, it lost by a couple percentage points. When Friends of the River, about 6 months later, did a post-election poll, they surveyed people who had voted, and they asked, what did you intend? And it turned out that over 58% of them had intended to save the river, but were confused, and only 38% were actually for damming the river. So the unfortunate story of the Stanislaus is the confusion that the opposition was able to spend a lot of money driving home made it hard for people to vote the right way in what they wanted to do. People of California wanted to save that river.
Lessons to be learned. How many wild rivers are there in California? And I believe that river rafting really started in California, and of course now it's all over the world. I've done river rafting in places like Nepal and Hawaii and other places on this planet. How many wild rivers should we be worried about? I would assume that there are threats to every single one of them.
California has, it's a little hard to calculate, but let's just say 1,000 rivers. 3 of them are undammed. And even sections of rivers that are dammed can qualify for wild and scenic status. California has a state law that provides wild and scenic protection, and then there's the federal law. There's quite a few rivers. I'm not sure of the total number, but there's probably 20 or 30 rivers in California that have that kind of special protection. The number of rivers people regularly run in California that you can raft easily are in the dozen to 15 to 20 range. People can kayak in much more extreme environments. California started the rafting world in the early 1960s with a couple of people using old military surplus equipment. Others had started rafting in Colorado on the Grand Canyon earlier than that, and there's some people in the east who started rafting around the same time. Military surplus equipment from World War II and the Korean War was really the driver because it gave people these inflatable boats instead of wooden boats to go down rivers. And then shortly after that, in the early 70s, dedicated rafts were developed, and now river running could explode as more of the baby boom generation got into the outdoors, and the whole idea of being outdoors became a big deal. The early 70s were explosive for the number of companies and people going out on rivers and doing other outdoor activities.
The history of rivers and rafting them and enjoying them and preserving them is so incredible. I'm so pleased that you are trying to save that history. Environmental organizations are trying to save ecosystems, wildlife, wild areas, and that includes rivers. How many in the United States still need saving?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when we think about saving rivers, the job is several-fold. One is preventing dams on remaining wild rivers, because there's almost never a justification for a dam these days. There are so few rivers that are undammed. So many rivers are dammed up. So there's that. But there's also restoration, and that's kind of a bigger thing these days than stopping dams. The economics of dams and the organization of environmental groups to fight unneeded dams is pretty good, but restoring rivers is maybe the biggest challenge out there, and there's an awful lot of organizations who work on restoring rivers, helping rivers, anything from the incredible experience of the Klamath River dams in California, the 3 dams up there being taken down, and restoring the entire river run to its original free-flowing status so that salmon can move back upstream and the whole environment can return to normal, to just being able to replant vegetation and clear away riprap and other things that have been done to denaturalize the river. That kind of restoration work, going all the way up into the watersheds around rivers, not just the area along the river, is very common work for land trusts and other conservation organizations all over the country.
How do we get people to care about rivers if they haven't gone on one?
I think almost everybody has experience with being next to flowing water, whether it's a creek creek in their neighborhood, whether it's driving by some large river. It's pretty easy to get people's attention on rivers. I think that's why so many groups are working on restoring them. So beyond that, showing people what it feels like, organizations like Friends of the River that take people down, often for very inexpensive prices, all of those things are the ways we get people engaged with rivers. Direct experience sells. A person goes on a river trip and they're changed. It doesn't ever go back. They're a different person.
So true. We're going to talk more with Larry Orman about rivers when we return in a moment.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Larry Orman. He is the volunteer manager for the Stanislaus River Archive and has been active with many other river and conservation organizations. We were talking about the wild rivers, the rivers that could be rafted, but I recall growing up in Orange County, and the Santa Ana River was over 50 miles long. It wasn't really raftable, but I recall riding my horse down in the riverbed until they paved it. Why are they paving rivers like the Los Angeles River and the Santa Ana River and other rivers when it's so much better to let the water flow and get into the ground?
Our attitude toward rivers has evolved greatly from the engineering approach of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, all the way to the later 1990s. But I think since that time, there has been a much greater understanding at all levels in economics, engineering, recreation about the importance of rivers. Rivers are the arteries of our communities. They're the lifeblood of our watersheds. And I think the value of all of that is much, much more broadly recognized now than it was some time back, in which places like LA River were cement corridors. Now there's places that are daylighting their rivers, and I think a much, much greater appreciation of why having a wild river, or at least a flowing river, really matters.
You were active in the 70s, 80s, and 90s as executive director of the Greenbelt Alliance, which was involved in land conservation. And in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, you were executive director of the Green Info Network. Could you explain what this computer mapping that your organization was doing and how that it has helped over 100 organizations?
Yeah, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, computing changed in the sense that you no longer needed a fancy, what would be called a workstation or a mainframe computer. You could have a desktop computer that could do a lot of things. Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, which is the kind of term of art for computer mapping, had relied on those heavier duty computers for a long time. But by the early 90s, it became available on desktops. And that meant that groups who were trying to find areas for land conservation, groups who were trying to analyze census data to find where public health issues were, or to find ways to direct people to places, all of those uses of computer maps that now I think we completely take for granted. People use a Google map or some other form of mapping on their phone, and it's just all there. Well, none of that was there back in the 90s, but the potential was there. And so that was the genesis in the mid-1990s of why I created Green Info Network, which was to be a consultant to other nonprofits who could use the technology. It was too hard for most of them to use it directly, but having a guide like Green Info meant that they could be helped to maps or data analysis or websites, all kinds of things. Green Info eventually got to the point where it was serving 100 groups a year. It's worked for almost 2,000 organizations now. It's still going on. greeninfo.org. The people are just outstandingly competent. Maps are hard. Most people don't read maps well. They don't see geographic information very well. And it takes real skill to make that stuff available to influence people, because most nonprofits are in the business of influencing people. And being able to do that with computer mapping can really, really help.
You went from being a guide, being outdoors, to office work. Did you ever miss going back out on the river?
When I stopped being a river guide and started up with my first organization, it was a lot of office work, but there was also a lot of time going out to public meetings and being able to just explore the Bay Area landscape and make sure we understood it well enough to protect it. But I kept up my river rafting. I would often go on weekends and take vacation time and go do trips, so I've been able to just have that be a regular part of my life. And in fact, the people that I was guiding with in the early 70s have have for 50 years now had a Seder meeting every year in April. We have a river Seder, as we call it, and now there's about 65 people, including grandkids, who show up at that every single year, all of whom were ARTA guides in the 1970s. So rivers have this incredible attraction where you just fall in love with the place, and more importantly, you fall in love with the community of people you have around you.
I recall going many times to Camp Lotus, to the Stanislaus River reunion of those who were active trying to save it.
Yes.
Every fall,
Yes.
there's a great gathering of people, and these are dedicated people. Everybody's welcome. They can learn from those who've been on the river and get active.
This is the thing about the Stanislaus River that you have to ask yourself is, why did so many people care so much and do so much hard work for that river? And those people are the ones that have relationships even to this day. That community of people is just remarkable, and it numbers in the hundreds. There's probably 300 or 400 people who are on the StanislausRiver.org newsletter site. Most of those were people who had direct experience of the river, and they still have an attachment to it. So that's pretty unusual. It's a remarkable thing to have that much commitment.
You've dedicated your professional life, your volunteer life, avocation, vocation to conservation, environmental protection, especially rivers. You were board chair of Friends of the River. What is that organization doing now?
Friends of the River, as I said, was started in the early 1970s in the fight to save the Stanislaus River. It grew through that into working for more rivers. It's California focused. There are other river organizations that are out trying to save rivers nationally. It has ended up having a very, very great track record of getting rivers put into the state wild and scenic river system, protected from dams. It's fought Auburn Dam over and over again up in the area outside of Sacramento that just doesn't want to die. But more than fighting rivers, it's engaged people in helping to save them, especially to work on restoration so that we're taking rivers that have been badly treated before and putting them back to their natural function. So Friends of the River is really a multi-purpose organization, small but very scrappy and very effective.
If I went to the website StanislausRiver.org, and Stanislaus is spelled StanislausRiver.org, I would see a lot of fun things, important information. What would be really special that I should take a look at?
There's a couple things, and I mentioned earlier that there's some changes coming to the website, good changes. What you'll see when you arrive at the revised website in a couple of months is a much clearer and evocative presentation of the overall Stanislaus story. But right now, when you go and you land on the homepage, there's a little link, and you can click a quick little video that tells you in words and music kind of what the river felt like. You can then go to a page that's called Highlights, and that page has all sorts of searches that you can click on, which show up as photos, documents, videos that are relevant to that search. We mentioned Proposition 17. There's a link there that you can click on that says Proposition 17. And so all of the things about Proposition 17 are there. You can sort all of these pictures that are in the gallery by the place along the river that they are. So you can literally go down the river as it was by scrolling through the pictures in the order of what we call river journey going down. So there's just so many different ways you can look at the river. There's a timeline log of all the events that happened from the early 1900s, but especially in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And you can see very, very detailed information on the litigation that occurred, demonstrations when Mark Dubois chained himself to a rock in 1979 to stop the reservoir. All of these things are available to be searched at and found on the archive. And when you get to any of them, you get really good pictures or really good videos of things that happened in the time, mostly all from the 1970s, early 80s, some of the 1960s. All of that's on the website. The new website will have even more stuff, and it'll have more identifiable stories. There's so many great stories of people who ran the river at floodwater, people who had an amazing experience up Rose Creek or the South Fork, people who had incredible experiences fighting for the river in so many different ways, taking on a congressman who'd been a big pork barrel champion and defeating him. Anyway, there's just so many great stories to be told. And the importance of those stories is that the Stanislaus is a symbol of what young people can do when they put themselves into something they love and they fight for it. It was young people who made this thing happen. It was people in their 20s mostly who didn't know anything about how to do this, but they plunged in and they made stuff happen, used their creativity and energy, and that's as much the lesson of the Stanislaus for today as anything is. It's not just a tragic place that was lost and that was beautiful and incredible, but it was the source of so much inspiration by young people putting themselves out there to do something. And with all of the climate change challenges, related things now, we need that kind of hope and inspiration.
As I mentioned earlier, it was the first river I rafted, and I found out that even though we could go down it in a couple of hours, it's 9 miles, I could jog the trail in a couple of hours along the river. We took over 2 days to do the river because every other curve of the river we would stop, we would enjoy, we would explore. I remember going into a cave on the river and we turned off our lights, our flashlights, and experienced the darkness. We saw beautiful flowers. We were always looking for the wildlife. There's a lot to see and do other than just sit on the raft and go down the river. You have to stop and enjoy it.
There's the term now about cuisine, slow food, and I think the Stanislaus was slow recreation. It was exactly that kind of thing where you could disconnect yourself and just be in a place that was absolutely exquisitely beautiful. It's hard to describe if you weren't there how beautiful that canyon was. A lot of the pictures on the website help evoke that, I think, but just that feeling of disconnecting and being in this rhythm of the river, it's very magical, and you can get that in a lot of rivers, but the Stanislaus was so special because you didn't have to have a week. It was very affordable to go there, and within that 2 days, you had just an incredible range of experiences. Just hard to imagine another place that had such a density of beautiful experiences.
You started your love of the Stanislaus when you were doing whitewater rafting guiding with Arta, one of the first river raft companies. How does guiding on the Stanislaus differ from guiding on other rivers? Because I know guides often did other rivers too.
The Stanislaus was the kind of learning ground, I think, for hundreds of guides. It was a place that, one, had a lot of people interested in going down because it was a beautiful, accessible place. And it was a place where, as a guide, you could learn very quickly and practice and get the core muscle memory of your guiding skills worked out. But you could also get the skills of dealing with people. Guiding is partly about putting a boat through rapids and taking it down a river, but it's also about helping people have a great time. As a guide, you're as much attentive to people as you are the river, and then there's all the logistics you have to do. Stanislaus was a learning ground for so many people who then went on. Even some people, we had Grand Canyon guides who got sent up to California, and they said, teach them how to row because we want them to row in the Grand Canyon. And the Stanislaus was a great place. It had low exposure. There wasn't really super challenging stuff, but it's the simple learning that really gets your muscles to understand and your eyes to be able to read water. Learning on a hard river is not a good way to start.
You've taken hundreds of trips on rivers. Tell me one of your most unique, special occurrences. Was it because of somebody famous that you guided down, or was it because you saw some wildlife that you didn't expect to see, or because you just enjoyed the out of doors? What was special?
One of the things that happened on the Stanislaus during the Proposition 17 campaign, I was managing Arta at that point, and we were in charge of all the news media trips and the political trips that would take people down the river and get stories. So Governor Jerry Brown was running for governor. His people said, hey, we want to take him down, and he'll say something about Proposition 17. And they said, but the challenge is we only have 2 hours in between campaign stops. And as you say, we often took 2 days to take people down that river. So we challenged some guides to go down quickly because the water was somewhat high at that point, and they got down in a couple hours. We said, okay, we can do it. We took his father, former Governor Pat Brown, down about 2 weeks later. He had a great time. He was jumping in the water and going off rope swings, just totally involved.
You've got so many great stories, and I wish we had time to hear more of them. I want to thank you so much for sharing your love of rivers and for preserving the history of trying to save rivers. Thank you so very much for being my my guest.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. And people should go to stanislausriver.org, sign up for the newsletter, browse the thing, and await the new revision. It's coming soon. Thanks.
Thank you. I have been speaking with Larry Orman, volunteer manager with the Stanislaus River Archive. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.